Okay, hello. We are live here on the land. This is the first time going live. Gonna see how it goes. This is not necessarily how I like to do things in terms of producing content. I like to take my time, especially if I totally screw something up, which I am definitely prone to do with things on the tech side. Um, so I'm going to try to just put the word out again here on Twitter, um, and get everybody tapped in. Again, if nobody joins for this live stream, that's also totally fine too. I'm going to repost this. But I'm just going to pin this on my page, and then we'll get to talking about the games that happened over this past Friday night, and of course, the Saturday game with Montwood and Hanks. So that's really what we're doing here today. So again, this is the Land Podcast. I'm Javier Cortez, a local sports journalist here in the Borderland area. I cover boys and girls prep hoops, and we're going to be discussing more or less the slate of games that we just had. Don't know how many live streams I'll do. Again, we'll see how this goes in terms of quality of production on my end. But just going to run through some scores, and then I'll break down the two specific games that I want to cover last night and today's game. Last night being Franklin at Americas, and then today's game, Hanks at Montwood. Just a quick note, I just think a good idea would be to stagger more games. It would obviously benefit people like me who more or less, try to cover as many games as possible. But I think it would make sense to not host every single varsity game on a Friday night. So stagger with some Friday, Saturday games. I kind of like how that would work out. But again, maybe that just benefits me, and that's not really for anybody else's benefit. So with that being said, let's pull up the scores. Let me share my screen. Hopefully I could do that competently. Let's see. Okay, so talking about the game. So a quick thing, I'm only going to talk about games that are posted. So if you see a game that's missing more or less, if you notice that, hey, where's my team score or something like that, there's a solid chance it wasn't posted. So if games aren't posted by program leaders or whoever runs the social media accounts, you got to do that. Otherwise, it's not really my responsibility to go on a fact-finding mission to find out scores. Just a simple tweet of a score would really just help things. So please just keep that in mind. If you want me to talk about your teams on these live recaps, again, I don't know how many I'm going to do. You got to post scores. If you don't post scores, then I don't really know what to tell you. So let's just run through the slate of games that we have for you. So starting with Eastlake and El Paso High, Eastlake won 54-20 over the Tigers. Pretty impressive win for Eastlake by 34 points. Eastlake, I think, is a team, like I said, going to be much improved this year, a lot more competitive in 1-6A basketball as well. And they beat an El Paso High team coming off a 24-win season. So good start to the season for the Falcons. Montwood beat Hanks 41-29. Again, I'll be talking about this game a little bit more in depth later, so I'm going to run through that. Pebble Hills beat Riverside 61-39. So in debating which game I was going to go to, there are a lot of really good games on the slate that I wanted to check out. And I was debating going to this Pebble Hills Riverside game because it's a great matchup with an elite 1-6A program in Pebble Hills and the class of 4A basketball here in the Borderland, Riverside, who won, I think, 30 or 31 games last year, barely lost. Pebble Hills went into Riverside and put in work, winning by 22 points. Of course, Riverside, they have a lot of really good top returning talent, but they did lose their best player from last season in Sophia Bustillos. So it'll be an adjustment for them, but they're still going to be a really good squad. Pebble Hills arguably has the best player in the borderline in Jordan Sapien, and other players like Crystal Talavera and Olivia White. I mean, they're a really, really strong squad. So not necessarily surprised by the results. I could have saw it going one or two ways, a more close competitive battle, or kind of Pebble Hills just showing that maybe they're a notch above right now. So not a surprise there, but both teams are going to be pretty good this season. Burgess with a 36-27 win over Socorro. So low scoring. Let me pull up the numbers on this that I got. I believe Danae Gonzalez dropped, let's see. Danae Gonzalez for Burgess, the senior guard, one of the best players in the borderline, dropped 32 points and 10 rebounds. So she scored 32 of Burgess's 36 points. Wow. That's pretty huge. I kind of wish I, again, could have saw that game just to see what it looked like. Burgess is actually missing two of their three best players, from what I was told. Alyssa Morales is currently out with a lower extremity injury, maybe an ankle injury or something. I believe she's in a boot. So they're waiting to get her back. And I'm not sure if Cameron Morales is playing for the team yet. I believe she's still finishing out her volleyball season. So that might indicate maybe the low scoring effort for Burgess, or maybe why Gonzalez took over the scoring load, scoring 32 of 36. But nevertheless, I mean, that's an impressive stat line. But Danae Gonzalez, again, is one of the best players in the borderland. So no real surprise there. So Burgess takes the win over Socorro 36-27. Isleta comes away with a 2-point win over Harmony. So that probably had to be a nail biter down to the end. Would it be interesting to see how that game concluded in its final 2 minutes? Eastwood put in work against Canutillo. Canutillo, by no means or measure, is a poor squad. This is just an indication of how good Eastwood girls basketball is. And Coach Falk has that team just running on all cylinders. 68-16, 52-point win. I believe this was at Canutillo. Again, those Eastwood girls, they are stacked, and they're in for another special season. So they look like they're off to a pretty solid start. Coronado beats Andress 46-37. I had a tweet on this about kind of the significance of Coronado picking up a win over Andress. Coronado was another sub 500 team. Lost more than a few games. So they had a tough go at it. And again, with that 1-6A murderer's row, you can't really blame them. But I believe it's Coronado's first win against Andress in about a decade or so. I'll probably have to fact check myself on that again, but I remember tweeting about that last night. So that's a big first win on the season for Coronado, especially because, Andress was, fifth in 1-5A. They won 14 games. They were a barely competitive team, even though they just missed the playoffs. So I think that's a good indicator for the T-Birds if they're going to have a season turned around more or less. Horizon beat Bowie 40-25. So interesting win for Horizon in that one, in a kind of cross-district matchup. Clint beats Parkland 44-41. Good win for Clint, kind of punching up a district, beating Parkland by 3. Irvin beats Tornillo 23-12 in a low-scoring game. I believe this is already Irvin's second game of the year. I double-checked, and I believe they're 2-0 now. They played Ysleta, won that first one, so Irvin already has 2 games in to start the season. They're 2-0. Fabens beats Austin, another low-scoring, nail-biting game, 23-21. And then Chapin coming away with a 29-point win against Del Valle. So again, these are two teams, Chapin and Del Valle, I kind of talked about a little bit yesterday, who I think are going to be much improved. They have some important key returning talent, and I think Chapin themselves, they're 7 games under 500 last year, but they actually got into that 4th spot within the 1-5A playoffs. So again, I think they're going to be a much improved team. They have a lot of key top returning talent from last season, and then some key additions coming up from JV, some transfers that are really, really important. And I think, it's already showing with a 29-point win against Del Valle. And then lastly, Anthony beats Young Women's Academy 38-6 in a pretty convincing win. So that's the slate of games. Again, if you don't see your team's score here, it's because they were not reported, posted. I double checked a few times before I went live on Max Preps on Twitter. So again, if you want me to talk about your team, if you want to get coverage, you got to do the bare minimum. You got to do some posting of scores, because that's really the only way we're going to be able to do this. I can't be in every place at once. So in the future, hopefully we get more games to go off of. But I think for the start, let's see, what is this? 6, 7, 6, 12, 13 games or so. So we got a good slate of games. But let's move on. Let's get into these specific games that I went and covered. And I'm going to start with the game that I was at today. And I see 64 people here. Wow, that's about 64 more people than I expected. Hello, folks. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate the support. But let's get into the game that we have today. So this was a bit unexpected, having Montwood and Hanks play. They were originally slated to play last night at 7:30 p.m., but for some reason, the game got moved to noon on a Saturday, which again, I had no issue with. It gave me an opportunity to go out and cover another game. I wish they would stagger more games like this. It would make my coverage a lot easier. But yeah, so this was the game that I covered today. Montwood came away with the win 41-29. So a double-digit win for Montwood against a pretty good Hank squad. But this was a really closely contested battle, really all throughout. Montwood got off to a 8-0 start, I believe, and never relinquished the lead. So Hanks was playing catch up for the most part throughout the whole game. But they made it very competitive and closed the gap in the second quarter, I believe, outscoring Montwood in the second quarter as well, and then making it very, very close in the third. But they ran out of gas there in the fourth quarter. Hanks was without some key players, some key starters, and a really key bench player for them. So they weren't in full force. Hanks has a lot of depth. They run about 6, 7 deep. So they were missing some important players, and it somewhat showed in terms of the guard play. They're missing some of their best players who were guards, Jax Alva and Marina Ruiz, I believe, two really important guards for them. So, there's that to take into context with this game. I think if Hanks had a full squad, does the result change? Maybe, maybe not, but I think you get a much closer decision than a 12-point win for Montwood. So with Hanks, I'm going to, temper some of my response because, number one, it's the first game of the season. And of course, they're missing important guards. But going into this game, it was a really key matchup. Of course, Hanks was the 2-5A district champions. They went undefeated last year, had one of the best scoring offenses and one of the best differentials in the borderland. Montwood on the other side, only 3 games above 500. But, that's really just an indication of how hard 1-6A basketball was last year. They really struggled against the best teams like Franklin, Pebble Hills, Eastwood, Americas, and you can't blame them. All those teams are excellent and will be excellent again this year. But they're much improved. I think one of the key matchups going into the game, or two of the key matchups going into the game, Zoe Burton, Mia Hairston, and then Nevaeh Moore and Jaslyn Hernandez at the center positions. More or less, Montwood of recent years has been the winner of a lot of these decisions. They don't play every year, but 3 of Hanks's last 4 wins against Montwood came a decade or more ago. So this has been a matchup that's more or less been won by Montwood over the years, but again, they don't play that much. But like I said, it was a really quick start for Montwood, an 8-0 run to begin the game, and it kind of looked like maybe that lack of depth and those injuries was going to possibly lead to I don't know, maybe a blowout. It kind of seemed like it was heading that way, but once the game got a little more physical and a little more ugly, Hanks kind of found success getting back into the game. What I really liked about the Rams is that they put a lot of pressure on the rim. They do not settle for jump shots. They really like to get to the rim. All 5 starters, their bench unit, it's really the way that they like to attack offensively. And it showed. So really, Montwood had a lot of success when they could get dribble drive penetration or out in transition. I think that's when they're really at their best. But when Hanks could kind of curtail that and keep them out on the perimeter, or let Montwood try to clean up at the free throw line, that's where I think the Rams really struggled and Hanks really got back into the game. So I think perimeter shooting this year for Montwood is going to be a key for them. If they can knock down shots from the outside, if they can be a little more clinical at the free throw line, you're going to see a really, really good offense. But they struggled in those 2 areas today. But again, it's the first game of the season, so no need to necessarily overreact to some of these things. But I think just for the Rams this year, they're really good at getting downhill. They want to get to the rim. They want to put pressure on defenses. But if they can make perimeter shots and if they can clean up at the free throw line, which they're going to be at a lot this season, they're going to be really tough to beat. Defensively, their ball pressure is pretty excellent. All 5 starters, I mean, they play with a lot of physicality and really stifling team defense. And they really gave Hanks a really hard go at it in the first quarter, especially because Hanks was really desperately trying to get the ball inside into the paint, and they really, from a floor spacing perspective, could not do that very well. And again, I think that's part of not having 2 really key important guards playing for them this game. So I think that will be cleaned up for Hanks. As the season goes on. I talked to their head coach after the game, and they expect to have a full roster back by the time of district play. So that should change. But Hanks is a really big team. They're probably the biggest team in the Borderland, and not just at the forward and centers positions, but they even have bigger guards. So, they want to play around the rim. They want to play with the size around the rim. But I think that's going to be a lot easier when they have a more adequate floor spacing to go along with that. So, yeah, that's the game of today. Montwood taking it over Hanks 41-29. But again, these are 2 teams that are going to be in the playoff mix. Montwood in 1-6A, Hanks in 2-5A. So a good physical, tightly contested game for the most part. But I think Montwood starting 5, their depth, their energy just kind of let them prevail over a slightly underwomaned Hanks squad. So that's the game of the day for Saturday. Let's get to the original game of the week, which was Americas and Franklin. So this was an absolute juggernaut matchup. These coming into this season were 2 of the best teams in the Borderline last season. Franklin won 22 games. Americas won 27. They both had some of the best scoring offenses, both had some of the best point differentials. One of the key matchups that I thought going into this game was going to be Emma Balsiger, senior guard from Franklin, and Kylie Marquez, who's a phenomenal wing for the Americas squad. They didn't guard each other, not necessarily match up against each other. I'll get into a little into that later in the analysis, but I thought just in general, if there's somebody you want to sick on Balsiger, you might want to put Marquez on her. But we didn't necessarily see that. The last 4 wins, this has been a rivalry that's been pretty back and forth. But last season, Americas definitely had Franklin's number. They beat, they beat Franklin last year by 12 at Franklin, and then they beat them again at home by 41 points. So, I mean, they really came away showing that they were definitively the better team. Nevertheless, even though Franklin lost some really, really important senior talent last season, I just have a feeling by the end of this season, they're going to be a better team than they were last year. And the reason being, I just think they got all the pieces at every single position that you need. And again, they still have a lot of key important returning talent. So it's not as if they're completely starting over. So it was my expectation that this would be a closely contested game, even with the new incoming freshman talent for Franklin. And we got that. And so much so to the more closely contested than I even expected. Um, Americas led the whole game from start to finish. There were certain windows of the game where it felt like, again, we might be in blowout territory, especially after the first 3 or 4 minutes of the first quarter. Really, where I think this game comes down to, and the difference here is just team chemistry and process, structure. And that's not really a surprise. Americas is roughly returning the same core group of players who've played together for quite some time. So, that really wasn't a surprise in terms of team chemistry and continuity to see those things. But it showed, when it came down to more or less, half court process, half court structure, half court execution. Americas was certainly the better team. And again, that goes back to coaching, team chemistry, continuity, things that Franklin, I think, will eventually have, but more or less deeper into the season, they're still going to have to figure some of these things out. So I'm going to try to break down two teams and the individuals on this one a lot more in depth. I'm going to start with Franklin, and then I'll end with Americas. If you've been following me on Twitter, I kind of broke this game down just a little bit last night, but I'm going to try to go a little bit more in depth this time around. So Franklin, yes, they have some key returning talents. Emma Balsiger, Kyla Winfield, Cameron De Avila, important players from last season. Balsiger, of course, one of the best prolific three-point shooters in the land. Kyla Winfield, I think, is already one of the most talented defensive bigs that we have, a really good shot contester. And then Cameron De Avila is, I just think, somebody who's going to play a really key role for them defensively. Just kind of as a ball stopper, somebody using a pressing system, and then she'll kind of find her spots in terms of where she can get scoring opportunities. But with that being said, this is a very, very new team. It's a very new starting five, and the reason being they are starting two freshmen, Allison Della O at the point guard position, and then Isabella Lee, who's playing more or less as an off-ball wing type player. And both are really, really talented, but with any freshman, they're trying to learn how to let the game come to them. And that was pretty obvious at some points last night, probably a little bit more so for Lee than Della O. But you can see like the bones of a really good team with this starting five. They really kind of have everything. A really strong, high IQ table setting point guard in Della O, who can go and get her own bucket. Balsiger, a great floor spacer, catch and shoot prospect. Isabel Lee, really tall freshman, athletic wing who can get out and transition in space and attack. Again, Cameron De Avila, who I think is really going to do a lot for this team defensively. Doesn't necessarily need the ball on offense, but she spaces the floor. She knows how to make the next right pass. And then Winfield, who again, is going to make a lot of her bones on rim protection, rebounding, stuff like that, even on the offensive end. So it's all really there, but still learning how to gain continuity. That being said, I want to talk a little bit about Allison Della O. She's the real deal. I mean, I was really impressed with her. Again, viewing this player through the context of just being a freshman, wow. It just makes you think in, my God, like 3 years, 4 years, when she's a junior and a senior, she's going to be really tough to stop because she was already pretty tough to stop last night to begin with. She finished with 21 on the night, lived at the free throw line, was in the paint just about all game long. So Americas is a really strong defensive team, great ball pressure, great defensive guards. But Della O certainly overmatched the trio of America's guards in this game. And her first 4, 5, 6 shot attempts were deep into the paint. I mean, she was by no means settling. So that was something that was certainly talked about before the game, exploiting that matchup in terms of height and frame. And she did it really well. Not everything fell, not everything looked pretty at times, but I thought the process, I thought the execution, I thought the decision making behind the actions and choices that she made were smart. And again, that's the thing that I've heard about this prospect is just high IQ, plays the game at a much higher level than her opponents, let alone any other freshman. So she really kept them in the game, you know, by leading both teams in scoring, but also just slowing the game down a bit for Franklin and getting to the line, getting some easy buckets. Without her in this game, maybe it would have looked like it would have looked last season where Franklin got blown out by 41 points. I think for Franklin, it's just finding a way to maybe play with more process and structure in the half courts. And again, it's the first game of the season, so you're not trying to judge them too harshly. But I just think with a new roster, that's what they're going to have to do, because there was times throughout the game, you saw them get a rebound and essentially playing 1-on-5 offensive basketball. And what I mean by that is not that it was one Franklin player down the court and only against 5 other players, but it was more or less one player grabs the ball, runs down the floor and doesn't pull it back out, doesn't look for other teammates, takes a quick shot, and it just didn't really necessarily work. But again, I just think that's a matter of a lack of synergy and chemistry that needs to be developed over the season. But once they do get that continuity down, once they do get a little more process and structure within the half court system, and kind of really understand that 2-woman game between Della O and Ballsiger, because I think that can potentially be incredibly lethal, because Della O is really high IQ, Ballsiger really high IQ, Della O really strong with the ball in her hands, can get to any spot on the floor. Ballsiger really intelligent about spacing the floor and kind of just floating around the perimeter and getting good looks from the 3-point line. She didn't have that many strong looks in this game, but again, I think that will change. And I've talked about Emma before. She'll have games where she'll go, 2 for 6 or 7, which, she wants something like that in last night's game. And then she'll have other games where she'll go 7 for 11, 7 for 12, and just blow a game wide open. So that's definitely going to happen this year. And Franklin, their depth was about 6 or 7 players, but they're mainly going to rely on their starting 5. So that's Franklin. That's kind of their individual side in that game. Let's get to America's. So the Blazers, again, one of the top teams in this area, and just, it was a bit of an uneven performance from them. It was a bit sloppy at times. They went through some lulls in terms of offensive play, but you saw everything that really makes this team great. And again, it starts with that chemistry and just that ability to kind of like play as one. This team in the half court, they're so hard to defend because they have such good floor spacing. And you can only rotate and recover so many times in one possession against this team before they catch you out of position, late on a rotation, in a scramble, and then they get a wide open 3. And I really feel like, again, that's where that was the big difference in this game, because the individual talent of Franklin certainly showed in this game, but the continuity and the team chemistry and the half-court execution from Americas really just proved to be better. And there is just time and time again where, they kept swinging the ball, making Franklin rotate, recover, and then boom, on that second, third, or fourth rotation, somebody was open. Somebody was hitting a big shot. And, Americas has 3 really, really good floor spacing guards in Mary Brooks, Jaden Herrera, and Kaylin Madrano. I believe last night The big score for Americas was Jaden Herrera. She hit 5 threes, 15 points. Last season when they played, she had 20 points in that huge blowout win. So this is a matchup where she's taking advantage of it. And so if you're not sound as a team defense, if you're not communicating, if you're not rotating on time, and if they continually have you in scramble mode, you won't be able to guard this team in the half court. They're too good. Their floor spacing is excellent. They have too many good shooters. And then that doesn't even get to, their two other great players like, Kylie Marquez and Nasiah Atkins. So really it came down to half court process, in my opinion. That's really where it was. When the game got sped up for both teams, or when there was ball pressure for both teams, it got a little frenetic, it got a little wild. But in the half court, that's really where Americas sealed the game, even though it was a 6-point victory. Individually, so Jaden Herrera, the leading scorer for Americas in this game, 15 points, 5 threes. Every three that she hit was super timely. But there's two other Americas players that I want to talk about. First, Nasiah Atkins. Nasiah Atkins is a junior big for Americas. She's kind of like their lone big, at least, who's going to get a significant playing time. And man, I was really impressed getting to see her play. And she's definitely on my radar now. Very athletic, but really smart in terms of running the floor as well. And those three guards in Marquez are great about hitting the open girl, hitting the open runner down the floor. So she runs the floor very well, gets to that dunker spot very well, and she takes advantage of her opportunities. That matchup between her and Kyla Winfield was excellent to watch. I wish, these two teams played 2 or 3 more times just so I can see those two battle again, because Atkins, really athletic, really smart about getting to her spots and getting found, and, has some offensive talent as a finisher. And then Winfield, is kind of the great foil to that, because she's such a good shot contester and a great athlete in her own right. So that matchup was really fun to watch. I think Atkins gives this team much needed versatility and presence in the paint. And I think she's going to be really important, especially come playoff time when Americas plays against bigger teams. They're going to need their quote unquote bigs or interior players to really step up and play well for them. And then Kylie Marquez. Marquez did not have a big scoring game. I believe she finished with like 8 points or something. And, there were times offensively where, she kind of floated through offensive possessions, or the ball didn't touch her hands. And you kind of wonder, when's Marquez going to get a shot in or something like that. But again, I just think that's the function of their offense, in terms of they have such great floor spacing, and Medrano, Brooks, Herrera, they all have the green light to shoot, and they're all really excellent shooters. So sometimes on offense, it seemed like she was kind of just floating through those possessions. But that being said, defensively, everywhere. I mean, she has an imprint on every single defensive possession. And I think it's because, being that they start 3 smaller guards, she has to slide down the lineup and guard and play in the interior. She has to guard bigs. If Americas goes to a zone, she's going to be within that kind of dunker spot area. So she has a lot of defensive responsibilities in the paint, away from the perimeter, but she's so good at reading that next pass, picking off passes, tipping passes, and she just does everything. So, even when she's not really scoring, or the ball's not in her hands on the offensive end, man, it's just go watch her play on the defensive end, and you'll see what I mean. And on top of that, she's a pretty excellent passer and playmaker when she does have the opportunity. So I was just as impressed as Marquez. I thought she was the best player on the floor last night from both teams, because again, even though the scoring wasn't there, you can't undermine how important she is defensively. And there's not a possession she does not impact, not a single possession. So Marquez was really phenomenal. Actually, going back to Franklin really quick, I do want to give some praise to Emma Balsiger. Defensively, she was pretty solid. She had a lot of good shot contests. Um, you would think that, Ballsiger matching up against, three quick, faster, smaller athletic guards might have a hard time dealing with that and might have a hard time in terms of like scrambling and rotating. And really, I was really impressed with Ballsiger on the defensive end, in a way that I didn't think I would. So again, that's the beauty of actually getting to go to these games now, and not just relying on word of mouth or past game tape, but just to kind of see it in person. I was impressed with Ballsiger on the defensive end. But anyways, back to Americas. This team's just going to be so good. I mean, they already are so good. It was an uneven performance. It wasn't their best game, but also at the same time, they're not playing an easy team. They're playing one of the best teams in the borderland in Franklin. And I just think this squad being down at the 5A level, I think they're going to feast. And, not to get ahead of myself, but they're just going to have the opportunity, once playoff time comes, to maybe do something really special. If not this season, next season. But just the bones, the structure, the process, the chemistry, it's really all there for this team, and it showed in game one. And that's kind of really what I'm looking for, as I go to these games, these early season games, because these are the initial games of the season. You can't expect everything to look clean and pristine. You're having new roster turnover, things like that. So it's not always going to be pretty, but I think what's going to separate teams are the programs that coming into the season, despite the sloppy play, despite the uneven performances, who has the best team chemistry, who has the best process in the half court, where's the structure at. And I think the really good teams from last season have good structure, have good process, but it comes back to playing with your teammates for a fair amount of time, not only in high school season, but within the AAU season too. And when you look at teams like Americas, this is a squad that has been playing together at the varsity level, but then in the circuit level in the summer for quite some time. And it shows. It really, really shows. I kind of felt the same way for Montwood too. You could really see the roster continuity in effect there. And I also thought their coach just did an excellent job too in getting them prepared for that game. So that's it. That's more or less it for today. Not much more to talk about. Again, don't know how many more live streams I will do per se. I'm going to repost this on my YouTube page. Hopefully I could go live from YouTube in the future. I had some tech difficulties. I was on Twitter today. So I'm going to go back, reassess this, look at the quality of the episode in terms of like audio and visual display, but also kind of on my end. Am I just rambling? Am I just making sense? Things like that. And then hopefully we can get this a bit more integrated. I could get some questions in, have some responses. I see we have over 100 people in here, which is wow. Again, already about 101 more people than I expected. So thank you so much for tuning in. And if people like this, more or less, if the viewers like this, if the audience wants me to keep doing this, then by all means, I'll keep doing this. But I just want to make sure that it's quality, because I just don't want to burn through content just for the sake of it. I want it to be good content. I want it to be quality content. So hopefully in the future it gets a little bit better. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for today. And again, maybe just the last thing I want to just reiterate really, really quickly. If you want me to talk about your teams, your programs, your players, your kids, you have to post your stuff. There are some programs that do a really excellent job with publishing and promoting their programs, their kids, their players. And there are other programs that could really stand to improve, because it helps people like me. All I'm really trying to do with this is try to give as much coverage to as many teams, as many prospects as I possibly can. That gets a lot harder when you don't get help from the people within the program. So update your rosters, post your stats, post your scores, promote your players, I follow these things. I see these things. There are 46 programs that I have mapped out in the Borderland region area. And I'm doing that twice over on the boys and the girls side. So that's 92 teams that I'm trying to, in some feasible manner, try to talk about or give some coverage. But I can't do that when teams don't post scores, report scores, don't have updated rosters, don't have Twitter pages or any type of social media pages where we can get this information. So, um, you know, you can't expect coverage if you don't do the basics. So, uh, you know, just promote, publish your players, and I promise I will give them coverage. I don't care if it's a 31 team or a 3-1 team. I go and watch every single team play. I'm not only going to be talking about the best teams, I'm going to be talking about everybody, but I can't really do that if you're not holding up your end of the bargain. So, just remember that. Um, but yeah, I think that's it for today. So I will hope to be back maybe with another live recording next week. I will be posting something on my Substack either on Sunday or Monday, so be on the lookout for that. And then I'll be at some more games on Monday and Tuesday. Okay, so that's the land. I'm Javier Cortez. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time.